Hi, Beck.
Hey Sally, how are we going?
Good. I'm just giggling because we were just chatting 20 minutes ago when we recorded episode 2, but we're
Yes, I
back.
know. We're
We're
back after a
back.
little wee break. We
That's
are back in the
it.
hot seat, ready to
I've
discuss something that can be quite controversial.
I know, feeding to sleep, and why as
Mm.
sleep consultants, we don't recommend it. But it comes with so many caveats because we know that is so natural and normal. This episode is not meant to convince you that you should not be feeding your baby to sleep if that is working for you and your baby. This is wanting to explain why, in the context of fixing a baby sleep issue, what we look for when we read your intake forms, when you sign up to work with us, and how moving away from feeding to sleep goes hand in hand with getting better baby sleep. So we want to, as always, look at this from a really holistic perspective, which I actually sometimes roll my eyes at that word because I feel like it gets bandied around
Mm.
holistic. But it's so true because sleep, as we'll keep banging on about, is not just about the sleep training technique and self settling. And feeding to sleep is actually one of the first places I start when I'm working with families, and how to restructure feeds so that I can set a family and a baby up for success, so that come bedtime and overnight wakings that are bound to probably still happen, a parent can know that their baby is waking from habit and not hunger. Because
Mhm.
as a mother myself, I nobody ever wants a baby to be hungry.
No.
And I understand that it can feel like a very loaded topic.
Mhm.
And I feel like when we know the why and the context, the fear gets taken out of it.
Absolutely. And I think understanding why a feeding to sleep scenario may not work long term,
Mm.
that brings you greater success long term. So the feeding to sleep at some point is going to end, whether it's at 6 months, 3 months, 3 years. You want to future proof your child for being able to learn how to put themselves off to sleep more independently. Um, and all the trappings that come with other people being able to settle them off to sleep as well. So babysitters, grandparents,
That's such a good
daycare,
point.
all the things. So having an understanding of why a feeding to sleep association is something that we look at is going to unlock a lot of doors, I think, for a lot of families.
That just reminds me that we're talking about this in a very general sense, in that a baby is otherwise healthy. We haven't got
Yes.
oral ties that haven't been revised yet. There's no unmanaged reflux. There's no weight gain issues or failure to thrive. In this episode, this is all about a very happy, healthy, thriving
Yes.
baby with no
Hmm.
feeding or latch concerns or weight issues. And I absolutely appreciate that for so many families, feeding to sleep, breast or bottle. And I think probably in this episode, in all of our episodes, I usually just refer to milk feeds,
Yep.
because for me, it doesn't, so long as the baby's getting enough, whether it's breast or bottle, it doesn't really impact
Mm.
the work that
Yep.
we do. But this this today's episode applies whether you are breast or bottle feeding. Now, I personally breastfed both of my babies for about 13 or 14 months, and I actually had the reverse of this topic, because none of my babies would feed to sleep.
Mm.
It was not a tool up my sleeve, mostly because I had this clinical oversupply. So they were full
Yeah.
constantly. And so come nap time, they were like, do not come near me with that thing.
Yeah.
I cannot take another sip. But I do appreciate and can understand the hesitancy for families moving away from feeding to sleep when it feels like that is such a critical tool in their baby sleep and settling toolkit. And
Mm.
now, as sleep consultants, we're saying we're going to stop that. So yes, that would be our recommendation. But what we're going to also do is supply you with yes, the why, but so many other tools in your toolkits. And then as time goes on, everything settles into place and your baby's taking big, great feeds throughout the day, self-settling beautifully at bedtime, and you've got other sleep crutches and sleep associations, if not self-settling during the day.
Exactly. Perfect. And I'm a little bit like you, Sally, in the way that I breastfed my little ones until they were 6 months, and then I moved to formula feeding from 6 months onwards. And it was a great transition for me. But I also had no issues with my little ones feeding to sleep. And that would mainly be because I had a schedule. Like, I was still using the book that I referred back to in episode 2. I actually used that book for my 3 children as well. And there was no option to feed to sleep. So actually, one of the things that I learned during, my work, like in these first couple of years, was that feeding to sleep was the biggest crutch in terms of underlying issues that we had to sort of work on for families, because I actually didn't, with my children, they didn't feed to sleep. So it wasn't something that I realized was a problem for some families.
Yeah, it just wasn't a variable that you had to navigate.
Yeah,
No.
exactly right.
And I think that's often, I think, when I work with families that have had subsequent children, the first one was often fed to sleep, and then second and third, they're like, oh no, we're not going to do that, because that stitched us up round one. But I think it's always important to say that, every baby and every family is different. There are absolutely some babies that can be fed, rocked, bounced, all of the sleep heavy, parent-assisted sleep associations under the sun, and then sleep 12 hours overnight and take 2-hour naps. But there are so many babies and families that is not the reality. And I think you touched on a really good point that even outside of the potential unsustainability of feeding to sleep, for some families, it's just no longer working because they don't want to be the only one that can put their baby to sleep. They're tired of waking too hourly to get up and breastfeed or bottle feed. They want to go back to work. They don't want to do that anymore. And that in and of itself, say less. That is reason enough, You don't need to justify why you no longer want to feed your baby to sleep.
The other reason that it is no longer, the other reason is that it no longer works. So, for a lot of families, I always say the feeding to sleep is the big guns, it's always the thing that helps your little one fall asleep. It's the clincher, so, rocking, padding, holding, that may not work, but eventually they'll feed to sleep and it does work. And then there are times when the feeding to sleep isn't the magic bullet anymore. And then families are, the desperation sort of creeps in. So this episode is for those families too.
Absolutely. And I think that leads into, a few of the common challenges that we see when feeding to sleep stops working, or the way that we interpret when we read an intake form to say, oh, this is because of feeding to sleep, which may, as a family that isn't as obsessed with baby sleep as you and I, it may not seem like a direct cause and effect, but in fact is often to do with, feeding and sleep, they're a match made in heaven. They have to both be aligned in order for both to be successful. So one of the things I see is that babies used to being fed to sleep, and then particularly around the 4-month sleep regression, when sleep cycles mature, a baby then often looks to have however they went to sleep replicated at the end of a sleep cycle overnight. So if they were fed to sleep overnight and that's all they know, that's the only way they know how to go back to sleep, they often start waking multiple times overnight to say, hey, I'm awake. Can you come and do that thing that you did at 7 p.m.? Rinse and repeat all night long. The other thing, transfer issues. Babies that are fed, they're unconscious, look like they're unconscious in your arms, and you go to delicately lower them down. And this is something I see as a baby gets bigger and older, and they wake up on transfer, and then you're back trying to feed, probably a very full baby because they've just fed to sleep, transfer,
Yeah.
waiting for that sort of sweet spot that is very elusive of are they out cold enough that they're going to
Yeah.
surrender to this, and I don't know what else to do because I've worked with families that have like their breasts through the dangled over the side of the cot to
Yes.
ease
Yes.
that transfer. Now, if that
Yeah.
works for you, like absolutely keep dangling. For me, that would be so unsustainable and
Mm.
literally maybe backbreaking.
Mm.
Um, and then, Becky, snacking during the day, how does that impact sleep?
So I think what happens when we are getting really close to a nap, and for families that are using the feed to sleep as a way to encourage a beautiful, easy transition to a nap, what tends to happen is they wait until the nap is, about to occur, and then they start feeding baby, and then baby is really tired. And so what will tend to happen is baby will suck, 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 yum, 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 sleepy, 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 drift, drift, drift. And then all of a sudden they're asleep, but they haven't necessarily completed a full feed. And so what you may find is that they've had a good little go at it. Maybe they've had a couple of minutes on the boob, and then, they're nice and sleepy, and, it's done its job and they're in bed. But what can then happen is because they haven't completed a full feed, they are going to wake and require a top-up feed to either go back off to sleep so you can sort of lengthen the nap, or they're just up for the day and they're hungry and they would like a top-up. And so you continually get these top-up sort of feeds that happen all through the day rather than a tanking up situation. And when we're moving into topping up type of feeds, that's where you get little ones that are maybe they're feeding every 90 minutes to 2 hours. They're just sort of getting like half a boob here and there, and then they become quite distracted and they're off to the next thing and so forth. And it doesn't seem like anything's wrong with that. And like, of course, for your little one, if it's no drama, it's no drama. But when we're looking at working on sleep and improving naps and the ability to fall asleep more independently and readily, a nice, full, complete feed is going to satiate baby so that they feel like they've just had a Christmas lunch. That nice,
This is
full,
making me hungry.
relaxed, feeling of, I just want to go to bed and sleep a million hours type of thing.
Yep.
So having a big feed rather than the snack feeding can really assist with the onset of sleep and helping babies to feel like they are able to do a full cycle. And so, if you're in the pattern of having feeds that are every 90 minutes to 2 hours, every 3 hours, and we're working with like a slightly older baby, so let's say, for example, an 8-month-old, if you're feeding every sort of 2 to 3 hours, then what tends to happen is the internal clock is wired into that pattern of expecting a feed every 2 to 3 hours. So when we are looking to lengthen naps, it can be a little bit tricky because you've had your awake time, you've just had a feed, but now baby is expecting to have another feed shortly after. So it starts to impact the longevity of the length of the naps.
I also find that with that, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say that with the snacking during the day, I often then find if a baby is used to taking small, frequent feeds, understandably, they may actually need small, frequent feeds overnight. So it may not even be just purely sleep association based. It may be a genuine caloric hunger need because, as you said, the internal clock is wired to say, I take this smaller amount frequently. They still may be getting the same feed volume, whether that's mils, ounces, time at the breast, for a baby that's on more spaced feeding, but they actually need to wake up more often overnight in order to get those calories in.
Yeah, and so the internal clock is a huge driving force for a baby's rhythm to the day. So whether that's feeds, naps, meals, your internal clock is going to start registering when everything is happening and then start sending hormones out in relation to when to wake to feed and have solids and do naps. So it is a very easy issue to have for a lot of families, because if you've got a little one who's having, say, 4 naps a day, that's 4 feeding to sleep scenarios that you're faced with each day, and then the subsequent top-ups that go along with that. So very, very common issue, the old feeding to sleep and the frequent feeds and the need to wake a lot overnight to back it up. So I think you can definitely loosen the feed to sleep grip from quite a young age. Obviously, when they're really little and they're newborn, they don't have a lot of awake time. So there is, without doubt, almost zero opportunity to move away from feeding to sleep, because their awake time is 45 minutes. The feeds are, by the time you've got them up and changed and then you've fed, then they're, yeah, exactly right. So this is more so for little ones that have probably got a little bit more awake time up their sleeves.
So where I personally like to start, so if I see a 24-hour sleep log that all of my clients fill out before we work together, and that includes feed times, feed volumes if it's a bottle, and what I like to do is I sort of move to feed, play, sleep, which sounds very stereotypical of a sleep consultant, but sometimes I elevate it. It's not just baby wakes up from a nap. That means that they feed, because often I'm working with babies that are taking very short cat naps. And so otherwise we're still stuck in this very frequent short nap, short wake window, snack feed cycle. So where I start to move towards is more of a spaced feeding sort of schedule, for want of a better word. And often from about 4 and 5 months, that's at 4 hours. So we like to anchor in our feeds to take out the confusion for parents, and to also help build a baby's pattern recognition in their internal body clock of like, oh, I get hungry now. I get to take this huge, big Christmas lunch, breast or bottle feed now. Then they move straight into a great wake window. We've set the stage for nap success. We've tanked up their calories during the day, so that then you get to bedtime and you think, great, we may not be dropping all overnight feeds yet, but we have set the stage so that a baby can now start the overnight weaning process. And I know that every waking outside of a scheduled overnight feed, I'm going to use my resettling sleep training technique to bring this all home. So one of the questions that usually pops up, understandably, when I talk parents through about how we're going to move to a 4-hourly feeding schedule is, okay, but what do I do when it's nap time? You've taken away the magic
million-dollar
wand
question.
Of feeding my baby to sleep. I gave them a great big bottle or breastfeed at 7 a.m. They're meant to take their nap at 9. Now what? And what I would say is use every other sleep association under the sun in order to try and get that nap in, because it will only take a couple of days, almost if that, for a baby to pick up on a new expectation around, oh, I can fall asleep like this. Now, day one may feel really clunky and messy because they're not used to falling asleep in the carrier or the pram or the car. But your consistency, plus knowing that they've just had this really great full feed and that this nap is actually being done with a really full tummy, they are going to be far more receptive to another sleep association. I often get parents to walk the pram, and you just go and do the nap out and about and use the motion of the pram as your new sleep association. So we've swapped out feeding to sleep and we've added in movement. No problem. We don't have to have these big expectations of, okay, now they have to self-settle in a cot all by themselves. No. Let's layer this, stagger it, and make it sustainable for everyone. You might also like to pop your baby in the carrier. If you want to bounce them on the Fitball, if you have been rocking, all of these things can start to do the heavy lifting, even if it's still a short, clunky nap. Doesn't matter. The change and the win that has happened is that they have not been fed to sleep. And with each subsequent day and nap is an extra opportunity to practice and your baby to pick up on this new sleep association and pattern. So that's where I usually start. I say, okay, you're going to feed your baby at these times. If it's with a bottle, I'm going to say you're going to offer this amount. I mean, luckily gone are the days where we say, they can only have 120 mils. Your baby can tank up as much as they like, but I usually like to give a range, of what to offer in a bottle. Otherwise, it's, if it's a double-sided breastfeed, if that's what a full feed looks like for you, you're going to do it at these times, and then you can do anything else to get your baby to sleep during the day.
It's all about the loosening. Yeah, 100%. Like I'm exactly the same. We anchor in our feed times. It builds the appetite around the feeds. So a lot of little ones who are snack feeding, they're like I said, topping up. But we want our babies to tank up, and in order to tank up, they need to build the appetite. Yes. So we have to create this gap between feeds to create an interest and an appetite to want to get on the boob or the bottle and go hell for leather, and that will stop that distracted on off, up down, pulling the nipple sideways kind of feed, which is, oh my gosh, I can just picture it now and feel it. Just lulling the bottle around in their mouth. That's right. Yes, that's right. We want the feed to be a really great focused feed. So that's the key, is to anchor those feeds in, create that appetite, get the internal clock moving into having everything offered at roughly the same time. Those hormones are released, so the appetite is there. And then that loosening of the grip that the feed to sleep association has. So like it's a sideways step. Obviously, we are using more props. But in saying that, the positive side to moving to different types of props is that it means that mum is now less chained to baby. There are, there's the pram, there's the carrier. Grandma could use either. There's the car. So we are now off to the shops, and baby can sleep in the car for half an hour. Yeah. And, and just by sort of creating the gap between the feed and bedtime, it offers an opportunity for a set of rituals to be put in place so that now new rituals can come into our little ones' bedtime routine, so nap bedtime routine or evening bedtime routine, that anyone can utilize to encourage the self-settling. So it really assists with the transition to daycare. So if you're going back off to work, anyone will be able to put your little one down. There is a set of sort of, tricks that you will use in order to, a sequencing that your little one will then start to register. Oh, okay, we're on the, home straight to bedtime here. I'm getting into my sleeping bag. I'm
Babies
having a couple of books. They're natural pattern seekers. So they really love to know what's coming up next. And that helps them to feel calm and relaxed. And
I must be a
help
baby
with
then,
the onset of sleep.
Knowing what's coming next. Yeah, snoozosaurus, that's right. Just swaddle me. But I think, so if we do 4-hourly feeds, and we're talking really from 4 months on, would you agree, for 4-hourly feeds? So then if your baby is used to feeding to sleep at bedtime, as you've just talked about, in order to fit in those patterns and rituals, I usually place that final breast or bottle feed 30 minutes prior to bed. And what I find that does is it gives you ample space to start adding in bath time. Bath time has already been done. But the going into the room, having some stories, some deep squeezes, popping the white noise on, it gives you time to fit that in. But not only that, it gives your baby a little bit extra time to be awake so that they're less likely to fall asleep on the feed because we're doing it 30 minutes before as opposed to the last 5 minutes in order to just put baby to sleep. They're a little bit more awake for it, and we want those calories are important in order to help the overnight plan. Yeah. And so sometimes I even say, if you think your baby's going to fall asleep in the dark nursery, even if it's 30 minutes before, go and do it in a different room. Maybe the TV's on low. dad or mum just got home and the dog's barking,
Yep.
or a toddler's banging some pots and pans, and just a little bit of stimulation so that
Hmm.
they are less likely to doze off on the feed, because we want them to take a nice big full feed. We want them to have time for, if they're a bit refluxy, that they're upright, or if they're gassy, that they've got time to burp, and then you've got time to fit in your pre-bed ritual of
Yep.
going into the dark room, sleeping bag, helping them
Hmm.
and supporting them and holding them as their eyes adjust to the dark. And then you've got the option to either continue on with, we're just going to swap out the feeding to sleep and use another sleep associate. I'm going to rock you, and I'm going to
Yep.
rock you for all those other overnight wakings overnight. Or you can go in, depending on your circumstance, with a sleep training technique and say, and now we're going to support you in learning how to self settle. Because the bulk of sleep work, for me at least, happens at bedtime. So I don't mind if there were sleep associations laid on thick during the day. You can still go into bedtime and teach self-settling then. But what it means is that you get to that bedtime moment, regardless of whether or not you are fully assisting your baby to sleep, but in a different way, or you are going to support them in learning how to put themselves to sleep. But they have got a full tummy with a day of chunky, amazing feeds under their belt, so that you know that if there are tears, it is not because they are hungry come
Yes.
bedtime.
And it's the confidence that it builds. Those big complete feeds bring a certain level of confidence to your nights, because the confidence around having a 4-hour feed schedule, and you can continue that overnight as well. If they've had a great big beautiful feed at say 6:30, let's put a number out there, and now they're awake at 8:30, 9 o'clock, you can know with absolute certainty that that's not a genuine hunger-related waking, and it gives you the confidence to resettle in any other way, whether it's using a technique or you're rocking or holding or patting back to sleep.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I would maybe touch on is how we work on our night feeds, and where the feed to sleep is no longer an issue. So
Yes, as in when you do an overnight feed, let's say you're feeding at 10:30 p.m., so we're feeding 4 hourly,
Yeah.
and baby falls asleep, oh no, on the bottle or the
Yes.
breast,
Yeah.
are you meant to wake them in order to
Yes.
self-settle? Such a good point
Yeah.
to clarify.
So this is where if we've got a structured sort of feed schedule in place, if the feed is 4 hours later, then we've had our final feed at 6:30. The first waking after 10:30, we're going to offer a full feed. So there's two sections to this. So I don't mind, and Sally, I'm pretty sure you don't mind either, that if they've completed the full feed, and they're snoozy and dozy and they're half asleep, or maybe they are fully asleep, if you can get a good burp out of them, they can go back into the cot and they can be totally crashed out like that.
Absolutely.
That's
I'm the
where I
same.
don't mind, because
Yeah.
it is
So long as it's been the full feed, I
yes,
don't see that overnight feed as a feeding to sleep, but rather an overnight feed.
exactly right.
Yeah.
The issue would be around if the feed isn't completed, and say, for example, they've gone on the boob like 10:30, yay, good job, little one, now you're on the boob, and then 30 seconds later they're off to Nanai Land and they're out cold. So this is where we're faced with a little bit of a problematic scenario, because we really need our little ones to tank up. This is an investment feed. So we want our little ones to tank up. So in this scenario, if they've conked out after 30 seconds, 3 minutes, half a boob, one boob, you really want to wake them up, change their nappy, spark them up a little bit,
Just
take
rouse
their
them.
sleeping bag, so that they are awake enough to complete the feed. So jump back onto the second boob, or you're offering the second half of the bottle. It's so important to use this moment in time to wake them up to complete the feed. And then again, if they fall asleep once they've completed the feed, totally fine, burp and back into bed. It's zero issue feeding to sleep at that time. The caveat is that they must complete their feed first.
I agree. And I think that's such a good point to clarify, because I often have parents ask me, oh no, they fell asleep on the breast at 11 p.m. They'd done both sides. Do I wake them and then start my sleep training technique? And it's just not
Mm.
not needed. If,
Yeah.
however, they were to wake 45 minutes after a
Mm.
nice full
Mm-hmm.
feed, that
Yeah.
is when you would know that that is a resettle with your chosen technique and not genuine hunger. And as you touched on before, so much of this comes down to clarity and confidence, because essentially what this does is it allows a parent, if they're sleep training bedtime and overnight, to go into the night essentially having two options on the table. It
Mm.
will either be a feed or it will be a resettle. And
Yes.
if you've worked, with a sleep consultant, then you have a plan for what time your feeds are. So you don't even have to do that thinking. You don't have to look at each other in the bed and say, are we meant to feed, or do I go and pat, or do I shush, or do I do a times check? It's just one
Yeah.
of the two. And what happens there is that I nearly always find a baby starts to push out their own overnight feeds naturally.
Mm.
So you don't even have to, go really hardcore with overnight
No.
weaning. The day calories start to do the heavy lifting because we've moved away from feeding to sleep, which means we've essentially moved away from day snacking. Babies have tanked up. They've got hunger for the breast or the bottle. You've still got your overnight feeds, but we know that they can go that little bit longer. Couple that with maybe some self-settling, and everything just starts to fall into place. And it does make me think, though, in terms of hunger, one of the questions that I am often asked is, will my baby be hungry? They're so used to having an on-demand bottle buffet. Will they be hungry because I'm now asking them to go for hourly? And my answer to that is that it's never hunger. It may be they're just not used to not having that feed as something to do, but it really only takes one feed, I find, to kind of start
Yes.
really making the change.
Yep.
Because maybe they took a snacky feed and then they waited 4 hours and they're like, hang on, I didn't get to feed every 60 minutes in that time. And then
Yep.
they're so ready for that 4 hourly feed that it breaks the cycle and you're on the up, and then they can last the next 4 hours. So sometimes I find babies could be cranky, but it's never they're not getting fed. They're just, we're changing the pattern and they're not in on the plan.
And the other question there's two more questions that I often receive from families when we are changing the feeding scenario up. The first one is, will my supply drop because I'm
And that's a
dropping
fair
feeds?
enough concern.
It is, yeah. My answer to that is that we're not dropping feeds, we're consolidating feeds.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's such
the
a good
key
way to
is,
frame it.
yeah, so instead of having the 8 feeds you might have over 24 hours, 8 to 10 feeds, now we're having 4 to 6 feeds over 24 hours. And those feeds are going to be incredible, beautiful, big, long feeds. You're going to feel drained at the end. Your supply is, it's a supply and demand type of affair. So if your little one is getting onto a 4 hourly structure, then your own body is going to get onto a 4 hour supply structure as well. So it is change. It's redistribution of calories and a redistribution of supply. So we're not, the key is to always consider the way that we're doing the redistribution of the calories is that we're never taking calories away. We're trying to improve and up calories in through the day to support slightly longer stretches overnight. So that's the theory behind switching the feeds up, and also by moving away from the feeding to sleep scenario, we are optimizing babies' potential to improve their calorie intake through the day.
Yeah. Absolutely. It makes me also factor in that one of the things that I also hear from families is when solids start to come into play, that
yes.
Even a much older baby, let's say 11 months old, that in theory should be quite well established on solids, and they're still not interested in it. And then we have a look at the amount of milk that they are having in each wake window. And understandably, a parent might think, they're not really interested in solids. I don't want them to be hungry, so I'll offer them more breast milk or more bottle. But what it actually does is it can rob hunger from the solids. And just like, my second baby, he nearly weaned himself at 6 months because he was just so keen on the solids. Again, I have the opposite problem of all of my clients. And I had to be like, whoa, 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 whoa. You are not allowed to stop having milk
No
at
steak
the
dinner
ripe
for
age.
you.
No,
Yeah.
much to his absolute devastation. But it will rob hunger. And so we need to create space in the wake window
Yeah.
for an appropriate milk feed that is still so important, and an appropriate solids feed that is so important. Whereas when you just eat the whole time, which don't get me wrong, like I love food,
Yeah,
but when
I
you
know.
eat the whole time, you miss those moments of like, oh, now I'm really hungry. So we have to space things out a little bit in order to fit everything that a baby needs, even more so when solids are in play and when we are trying to fix sleep issues.
And I think that is that, and we have bandied this around a lot, the holistic side to things. Like in order to get sleep really well, we are fixing a lot of feeding, solids, timings. We're getting a lot of that organized through the day to support better sleep. And again, like you were saying, like if we've got the good feeds and milk feeds and we've got some good solids, we also need to allow digestion time and how that can impact. So there's a lot. Like I feel like we are, even though this episode was feeding to sleep, I really hope our listeners are getting a really good understanding of how the feeding to sleep association can impact a lot of different areas, and how it can, just by moving that one area of their day, switching it up for a different type of sleep prop, can improve their little one's sleep almost immediately. Like it is,
Absolutely.
it's a big step to change, because there is a very tight grip on feeding to sleep. And obviously, once you sort of make that decision, like you using all the strategies that you outlined before, if you can do that and you can repeat it over a couple of days, you'll find that things are going to start to improve quite dramatically. And with the feeding,
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
I keep cutting you off.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, it, like the hard part of using the 4-hourly feed schedule is that the hardest part is that first initial wait time to get onto the schedule. And then I often find that we are totally on board with a 4-hour schedule within 12 to 36 hours. Like it doesn't take any
Agreed.
longer than that. And it's so much easier for families.
And also the satisfaction of, this is what I hear from parents too. Two things I hear. One is that felt so good to give them a full feed. I have not experienced that in months, if at all. But the other thing I hear, and maybe I'm a bit of a feeder too, but the other thing I hear is that from parents whose babies are on solids that were always deemed a picky eater,
Yes.
all of a sudden they are not a picky eater. They just weren't hungry enough. And the same on the breast or the bottle, they're just a distracted eater, or they're not very hungry. And when we space feedings and they build genuine hunger for it, it can honestly transform a baby from what we thought was picky or fussy or not that interested into, oh no, again, they just weren't hungry enough. And it's done in a really age appropriate way. And it always makes me think, growing up, we had 3 dogs growing up, and every time we had a puppy, we'd notice that they would have something to eat and then just pass out. That sort of puppy sleep where they're just you could be in a cruise ship like I was and hit a whale and that puppy would still be asleep. But so my mum used to say when we were very little, full tummy go nai-nai. And every time I do a consult where we are changing around feeds and feeding to sleep, I think exactly the same thing. Full tummy, go nai-nai. And that is what we want, coupled with an opportunity to support a baby in sleeping more independently or in just a different way, but also to help parents feel more confident and competent when it comes to feeds and settling, and have a really satiated baby that's not looking to pull their top down every 45 minutes during the day and awake every 45 minutes overnight.
That's right. Because there is a common theme of don't feed your baby to sleep, but there's really no context to the underlying reasons for why. So I hope that our listeners have a really great understanding now of the
and
why.
now they'll know that when they book in with one of us and we say, okay, we're going to move away from feeding to sleep, they'll say, oh yeah, we listened to episode 3. We understand why. We are on board. We just need you to tell us when to feed, how much, and then you'll watch it all fall into place. So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, again, we could just keep going on. Feeding to sleep and feeds and sleep in general are such an important component of the work that we do. So I'm sure it will come up in other episodes. But feel free, if you've been listening to this, if something didn't make sense or if you've got further questions, definitely drop us a comment. And if you are currently struggling with feeding to sleep, then hopefully there are some tangible tips and tricks that don't feel too scary at all. And if you're listening to this and think, nope, I'm still wanting to feed my baby to sleep, then absolutely keep on keeping on. This is just for anyone who is wondering why and how from a sleep consultant brain.
Yes.
The method behind our madness.
Yes, exactly right.
Until next time, you've been
nap
trapped.